It was just past 8 in the morning when Sarah Monroe carried a tray through the back glass door of La Vista Café, balancing 2 coffees, a croissant, and her own uneasy feeling. Across the room, Jonathan Pierce, a billionaire tech investor known for his steel nerves and polished suits, was already at the corner table, staring at that morning's financial summary on his tablet. He didn't see Sarah. She saw something wrong. A tiny number in a spreadsheet, a column shifted, dollars that didn't add up. No one else noticed, not his CFO, not his legal team, not even Jonathan himself. But Sarah's heart thudded so loudly she could barely steady her hand holding the tray. It was so small, anyone else would have ignored it. But this tiny detail, that one line that looked ordinary, balanced, would soon save Jonathan millions. Jonathan looked up from his tablet, frustration already pulling at his jaw. "These numbers, something's off," he muttered. His CFO, Rebecca Lynn, launched into an explanation. "We used the latest projections, the product forecasts, all standard." But Sarah, wiping the rim of a mug nearby, heard a phrase Jonathan's CFO had said aloud, vendor fees, yet saw they were missing from the total. "Before we uncover the shocking truth, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and let's dive in. How could a simple waitress see what an army of lawyers and advisors missed?" Marissa Hale was 24, and most mornings she woke up before the sun, forcing herself out of a sagging mattress in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. Her world wasn't measured in billions or even millions. It was measured in overdue notices stacked on the kitchen counter and the prescription bottles lined up by her mother's bedside. Marissa's mother, Eleanor, had been battling a chronic illness for years, and between hospital visits and part-time jobs, the weight of survival fell on Marissa's thin shoulders. She tied her hair back, slipped on the same faded apron, and walked into La Vista Café each morning, not because she dreamed of serving coffee for the rest of her life, but because it was the only way to keep the lights on. Every shift wasn't just work, it was a fight against time, debt, and the quiet fear of losing the only family she had left. On the other end of town, Mr. Charles Hawthorne lived in a world that felt almost untouchable. A billionaire investor whose name appeared on magazine covers, financial reports, and business networks, he was a man both admired and whispered about. Hawthorne carried himself with an air that filled every room, his custom-tailored suits, polished shoes, and precise movements making it clear he was someone who never had to wonder where his next meal would come from. People described him as mysterious, brilliant, sometimes ruthless, but always calculating. He had built his empire on spotting opportunities others missed, the kind of talent that made his peers both envy and fear him. Yet for all his wealth, he often slipped into La Vista Café quietly, away from the noise of shareholders and boardrooms, sipping his espresso with the calm of a man who seemed to control everything. At least, that's what the world believed. The contrast between Marissa and Hawthorne was almost cruel in its clarity. She lived in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of detergent and fried food, while he owned estates where the grass was trimmed by gardeners paid more in a month than she earned in a year. She clipped coupons, counted pennies, and avoided calls from collection agencies, while his conversations revolved around multi-million-dollar acquisitions and international markets. But in that small café, their worlds brushed against one another. Marissa would bring him his coffee, often noticing the way his eyes never left his screen, the way numbers danced across it faster than most people could comprehend. She didn't belong to his world, and yet her quiet resilience and sharp eyes meant she saw details others overlooked. And soon, that very habit, born out of survival, sharpened by hardship, would place her directly in the middle of a scandal worth millions. The mornings at La Vista Café always followed the same rhythm. Retired veterans read the newspaper by the window, office clerks grabbed black coffee in a hurry, and families shuffled in before school bells rang. The air smelled of toasted bagels and fresh grounds, and for most people, it was just another day. But when Charles Hawthorne entered, the room seemed to shift. Conversations lowered, eyes flicked in his direction, and though he barely acknowledged anyone, his presence demanded attention. He spoke sparingly to the staff, offering no more than a nod, yet his crisp tone and the impatient way he glanced at his watch revealed a man who valued control above courtesy. To Marissa, he was both fascinating and frustrating, a customer whose life seemed impossible to touch, yet whose every small habit told her something about the person behind the headlines. And then one morning, the ordinary broke. On that day, Hawthorne sat in his usual corner, his phone pressed to his ear as Marissa refilled water glasses nearby. His voice was lower than usual, almost guarded. "No, it can't go through yet," he muttered, his fingers drumming against the polished wood table. "The numbers won't hold if we release early. Delay it." He paused, then added in a tone sharper than the espresso machine's hiss, "No paper trail, understand?" Marissa froze for just a second, her pen hovering over her order pad. She wasn't supposed to listen, but the words carried a weight that felt dangerous. She stepped back, trying to appear busy, yet her pulse raced. She didn't know who was on the other end of that call, but she realized she wasn't the only one in the cafe hearing it. A man at the counter lowered his newspaper slightly, his eyes narrowing in Hawthorne's direction, but she didn't know who else was listening. Later that week, another clue surfaced. As Marissa cleared tables near Hawthorne, she spotted a folder half slipped from his leather briefcase. Its corner revealed a single page, a check, already signed, but the signature was not quite right. Marissa had seen his handwriting before, neat and deliberate, yet this one looked rushed, almost forged. She blinked, unsure if her tired eyes deceived her. She hesitated, then quietly placed the folder back in its place before Hawthorne noticed, but the image burned in her mind. Why would a man as meticulous as Hawthorne allow a document like that to sit carelessly exposed? She forced herself to return to the counter, but the question gnawed at her. Was she imagining things, or was something far more serious unfolding right in front of her? And what Marissa saw next would make her question everything. The very next morning, Marissa caught another fragment. Hawthorne leaning close to his CFO, Rebecca, who had joined him for a quick coffee. Their words were hushed, urgent. "It's already been transferred. If anyone asks, it's a consulting fee," Rebecca whispered. Hawthorne gave a stiff nod, his jaw tight. Marissa busied herself at the espresso machine, but her ears burned with every word. Her instincts told her that this wasn't casual business talk. It felt like something hidden, something dangerous. She wanted to brush it off, to convince herself she was misinterpreting the fragments she caught. But the detail from the check, the strange phone call, and now this, they stacked together like puzzle pieces, and with each passing day the picture grew harder to ignore. Marissa didn't yet realize it, but the puzzle she was piecing together would soon entangle her in a scandal worth millions. Behind the polished doors of Hawthorne's empire, the truth was unraveling. For months, his financial empire had been bleeding quietly, a trickle so well hidden that even the sharpest minds on his payroll failed to catch it. The whispers Marissa overheard, and the oddities she noticed, the rushed signature, the evasive phone calls, the coded language of consulting fees, were not isolated mistakes. They were symptoms of something far greater. Hawthorne, the billionaire who commanded entire markets, was standing at the edge of losing millions through a fraud carefully stitched together by someone close to him. Investors had begun to ask questions. Board members were restless, and yet every professional advisor tasked with protecting his fortune had combed through the numbers and found nothing. And that was the cruel irony. The truth was right there in plain sight, but only a waitress with unpaid bills had seen it. Marissa couldn't shake the detail that haunted her. She had memorized the crooked slant of the signature, the misplaced decimal in the report, the sharp tone in Rebecca's voice. Each fragment seemed insignificant alone, but together they formed a story too dangerous to ignore. She replayed it all while wiping tables and balancing trays, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind tried to solve a puzzle she had no business touching. Should she tell someone? What if she was wrong? If she spoke up and it turned out to be a misunderstanding, she could lose the only job keeping her afloat. Worse, She could humiliate a man with more power than she could ever imagine crossing. But silence carried its own weight, pressing down on her until even the smell of coffee and the sound of clinking dishes couldn't distract her anymore. At night, lying awake in the dim light of her apartment, Marissa wrestled with the impossible choice. Her mother's fragile breathing filled the silence, reminding her of the stakes. One wrong word could destroy her job and her life. But doing nothing could allow a fraud worth millions to flourish unchecked, tearing apart a company that hundreds of families depended on for their own livelihoods. Her chest tightened with the thought. She had always prided herself on seeing what others didn't: the missing dollar at the register, the change shorted by a careless cashier, the warning signs in her mother's medical bills. Now, that same habit had dragged her into a world where her choice could alter the future of one of the country's wealthiest men. The detail she noticed was no longer just a curiosity. It had become the missing puzzle piece in a story too dangerous to keep to herself. When Marissa finally gathered the courage to speak, she expected to be dismissed, maybe even fired. Her voice trembled as she explained what she had noticed: the misplaced numbers, the suspicious signature, the conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. At first, Hawthorne's sharp eyes narrowed with irritation, his polished demeanor hardening into ice. But as she laid out the details one by one, his expression shifted. He leaned back, silent for a long moment before whispering, "Show me again." For the first time, the billionaire who commanded boardrooms and intimidated executives was relying on the words of a small-town waitress. It was not trust exactly. It was desperation. Reluctantly, Hawthorne agreed to meet her after hours, away from the café's curious eyes, where the truth could be spoken without risk of eavesdropping. That decision marked the beginning of an investigation that neither of them could walk away from. The first meeting was in a dim corner of the café after closing, the lights low, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Hawthorne spread out documents across the table, papers Marissa had no right to see, and yet her keen eyes traced every line. Numbers that appeared balanced at first glance betrayed tiny inconsistencies once stacked together. Payments routed through shell accounts, vendors that didn't exist, signatures altered by a hand skilled enough to fool an accountant, but not Marissa's memory. Hawthorne's jaw clenched tighter with each discovery. He muttered the same phrase over and over. How did I not see this? But the more he uncovered, the less clear the truth became. Was he a victim of betrayal, or had he been complicit in building the very system now crumbling? The deeper Marissa leaned in, the more she wondered whether she was uncovering a fraud or being pulled into one. Hawthorne began introducing her to people she had only read about in newspapers: his attorneys, his private investigators, even a trusted partner who had once vouched for the now suspect CFO. These secret meetings took place in hotels, quiet offices, and even the back of a limousine parked discreetly by the river. Each time new documents appeared, and with them new names and shady connections. Marissa found herself staring at photographs of associates with hollow smiles, men and women who seemed respectable in public, but left trails of questionable deals in their wake. Every layer peeled back revealed another, darker truth. She should have felt powerful, necessary, but instead, fear settled in her chest. She couldn't escape the gnawing question: was she truly helping expose corruption, or was Hawthorne using her sharp eyes as a cover, making her part of something far larger and far more dangerous than she could comprehend? The deeper she looked, the more dangerous it became. The trail of numbers led Marissa and Hawthorne deeper into the shadows of his empire, but nothing could have prepared her for what surfaced next. Late one night, in a rented office downtown, Marissa sifted through invoices spread across the desk. At first glance, they looked ordinary, but her sharp eyes caught what others had missed. The same vendor appearing under different names, charges duplicated across months, payments routed through accounts that existed only on paper. When she traced the path further, the truth sent a chill down her spine. These accounts weren't linked to some rival company or anonymous hacker. They traced directly back to someone inside Hawthorne's inner circle, his most trusted advisor, the very person tasked with safeguarding his fortune. The betrayal was staggering. A man who had sat beside him in boardrooms, sworn loyalty for years, was siphoning millions right under his nose. Marissa wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen the name typed on those documents, but she couldn't. The evidence was clear, the deception meticulous, and the scale almost unimaginable. She placed the papers in front of Hawthorne, watching the color drain from his face. "It can't be him," he whispered, shaking his head, but the truth was undeniable. His empire hadn't been attacked from the outside. It had been bleeding from within, by the very hand he trusted most. For Hawthorne, the discovery was devastating, but for Marissa, it was something more. She realized that in exposing this betrayal, she had crossed a line she could never return from. The man stealing millions had covered his tracks too well, and if she could find him, he would know she was the one who uncovered him. That knowledge made her more than a witness. It made her a threat. It started with small signs. A black sedan parked across from her apartment for 2 nights in a row. A phone call that went silent the moment she answered. A figure she swore was following her down the narrow street after her shift. Each time her pulse raced, and she convinced herself it was her imagination. But then the warnings grew louder. An envelope slipped under her door with nothing inside but a single word scribbled in red ink. Stop. Fear consumed her, but so did resolve. She had spent years fighting to survive, and she wasn't about to be silenced now. Yet in her heart, she knew the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about Hawthorne's fortune anymore. The betrayal had reached into her own life, and if she kept pushing, the cost might be fatal. And that's when Marissa realized she wasn't supposed to survive this. The pressure on Marissa grew unbearable. Every corner seemed to hide eyes that didn't belong. Every footstep behind her at night made her pulse spike. One evening, walking home after a late shift, she heard the hum of an engine crawling slowly behind her. When she turned, the same black sedan she had noticed days earlier idled under a flickering streetlight. Fear gripped her, yet she forced her pace steady, refusing to run. Hours later, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You've seen too much." She trembled as she clutched the device, realizing this was no longer a game of secrets in boardrooms. It was her life on the line. Someone wanted her silenced, and they would stop at nothing to make it happen. The waitress, who once worried only about overdue bills, was now trapped in a fight far bigger and far more dangerous than she ever imagined. Hawthorne, confronted with the betrayal of his most trusted advisor, could no longer ignore the truth. Yet he stood at a crossroads. His instinct as a billionaire was to protect his empire at any cost, to cover the scandal quietly, shielding himself from humiliation. But there was Marissa, the young woman who had risked everything to bring the truth to light. For the first time, gratitude warred against greed inside him. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he admitted to her, "If you hadn't seen it, I would have lost everything." His words were heavy with sincerity, but his silence afterward was heavier. He knew exposing his advisor meant dragging his company into public scandal, a storm that could shake his empire. And still, he could not deny what Marissa had given him, the chance to stop the bleeding before it swallowed him whole. Together, they chose the harder path. The evidence was handed to federal investigators, the betrayal revealed in brutal detail. The headlines came fast: top advisor arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded the courthouse steps, and for days the city buzzed with disbelief. Hawthorne's empire, though shaken, survived, and his name, once at risk of ruin, was pulled back from the brink. But the spotlight that exposed corruption also dragged Marissa into the open. She was no longer just a waitress. She was the young woman who had seen what no one else had, the one who caught what an army of lawyers missed. Yet behind the recognition came whispers, threats, and the haunting knowledge that her life would never be the same. Imagine being in her shoes. Would you stay silent or risk it all? The public celebrated the justice served, but for Marissa the cost was deeply personal. She could never return to anonymity. Every glance in the café felt different, every shadow on the street heavier than before. She had saved a billionaire from collapse, exposed a betrayal that rocked financial circles, and proven that sometimes the smallest voices catch the loudest lies. Yet the scars of those nights, the fear, the threats, the knowledge that powerful enemies now knew her name, would stay with her forever. Hawthorne's empire was preserved, his wealth intact, but Marissa's life had been rewritten in ways she hadn't chosen. She had uncovered the truth, but truth always demanded a price. The storm finally broke. Courtrooms echoed with the sound of testimony, headlines carried the weight of truth, and the billionaire's empire stood, shaken but not shattered. Charles Hawthorne had been saved from losing millions, his fortune preserved, his reputation salvaged from the brink of collapse. But none of it would have been possible without the quiet observation of a young woman others overlooked. Marissa Hale had not only exposed a betrayal, but had reminded the world that power doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it blinds you. Justice was served, and though Hawthorne returned to his world of wealth and influence, he would never again underestimate the cost of trust, or the value of those who dared to see what others missed. For Marissa, the reward did not come in the form of riches or lavish gifts. What she gained was far more lasting. The hospital bills that had haunted her mother's nights were paid in full, not by charity, but by recognition of her role in saving an empire. The café where she once worried about tips became a place where customers whispered her name with admiration, not pity. She was given security, stability, and most importantly, the peace of knowing her mother could finally rest without fear of eviction notices or overdue prescriptions. Respect replaced struggle, and for the first time, Marissa's shoulders felt a little lighter. As the dust settled, the story of a billionaire and a waitress carried a truth that stretched beyond headlines. Sometimes the smallest details are the ones that change everything. The misplaced decimal, the forged signature, the whispered phone call, all of it overlooked by powerful men in suits, yet caught by the eyes of someone no one thought mattered. And in that truth lies a lesson for all of us. That courage doesn't always come from having power, but from using what little we have to stand for what is right, even when the cost feels unbearable. Do you think Marissa should have spoken up sooner, or stayed quiet? Let us know in the comments. And if this story gripped you like it did us, hit that like button and subscribe. We share stories like this every week.